They broke the steel tide with a whisper. Not an order barked over radios, not a hero's speech, just hush passed along a hedgerow of rye to 4 squat gun houses crouched east of Prokhorovka. Battery choir Su-152s with guns like cathedral bells waited under tarps that smelled of old rope and diesel. A white handkerchief tied to a willow switch would tell them when to breathe fire. Inside gun 2. Katya the loader counted breaths, not seconds. Her shoulder lived in a permanent bruise the color of old plums. Each 152-millimeter shell had a name in her head, because names make you careful. Maksim the gunner pressed cheek to sight a small green rectangle, already printed into his bone. Semyon 19 drummed 4 quiet taps on his knee and stilled. Their commander, a short sergeant from Voronezh with a steady glove, kept his hand hovering over the radio, as if pressure alone could calm the air. Across the fold of ground the locals called Milk Ridge Panthers lifted their noses into the light. In 421, Erich felt track pads bite dirt and told himself the new long-barrel 75 would make angles behave. Manuals promised so. He kept a drawing his daughter had folded under the mapboard, a tank with eyelashes, a sun with too many rays, a stick figure waving from the hatch. Propaganda didn't mention eyelashes. Reality did. The willow moved not wind, hand. The commander's glove dropped like a priest's palm over bread. The first salvo felt less like thunder and more like a locked door opening. 4 SU shells crossed the field in one clean chord. The lead Panther bowed at the jaw momentum torn out of it. The second shot bit where a driver hides his fear. The third sheared a turret ring so clean the turret looked briefly like a hat. The fourth walked into a fuel line, and for a heartbeat the ridge spoke flame. It didn't end the attack. It taught it doubt. Across the German net, voices flattened. Across the Soviet wire, men remembered to breathe. In 421, Erich tasted copper and swung his gun, suddenly aware of a new verb the morning had smuggled in reconsider. Katya slammed the next round home. Brass sang a bright note, and the breech took it like truth. Maksim exhaled. Semyon fed the hull a fingertip of motion. The glove lifted, the glove fell, the second salvo went, and the wedge of Panthers blinked. The orchard on the other side, apples hard as marbles, accepted percussion, and shook leaves as if September had raised a hand. Bees rose irritated, then forgave. The ridge paused. The charge hesitated. In the pause hid the hinge of the day. What broke the steel tide was not only steel. It was patience, arranged into guns. It was a dead, quiet gully, a willow switch, a handkerchief, a glove, 4 crews who had taught themselves to wait longer than doctrine said a human can. Before a volley could teach armor to think again, waiting taught people to. The Kursk salient was a jawbone of earth and rails. Weeks before the Panthers came, battery choir dug in on the shadowed side of the Milk Ridge. They painted their gun houses with weed stripes and begged the sappers for extra mines where ground forgives tracks too easily. They strung field wire through rye heavy with rumor. At dusk, they rehearsed loading with mittens because July turns to winter inside a steel box when fear cramps a hand. Hush began as courtesy. Then it became a discipline. Katya had learned hush at a different bench. Her father was a watchmaker. His breath could coax a spring into honesty. War took him. She kept the habit name parts, never force what you need tomorrow. She wrote in a pocket notebook, breech spade rails oil, but never opened it under fire. Superstition has just solved problems preserving themselves. Maksim, a millwright apprentice. Before the mill became a hospital, wore the sight on his cheek like a second identity. Semyon had never seen an ocean, but drove as if he knew waves by touch. He counted in 4s his grandmother's prayer beads turned into a rhythm on a knee. The commander kept a photo of his wife and daughter. In front of a cucumber vine the child insisted was a dragon. He let the dragon be true. Children are good at strategy. On the far side of the fold, right angles, march with their own music. Erich received his Panther like a promotion he hadn't requested. Sloped glacis, long gun, manuals that spoke about distance as if it were a bad habit. The canteen posters made the enemy a mass. Training made confidence feel like armor. At night, under the engine's tick, he unfolded the drawing again, eyelashes, a happy sun, a waving figure, and accidentally practiced humility. The field filled with small conspiracies. Sappers planting mines in crescents because straight lines are boasts. A signaler who tucked a willow twig in her cap and learned the way wind shifts when a column is still a village away. A farmer hiding his only cow in a trench that remembered another war and trading milk for rumors that sometimes turned true. Hush grew teeth. Engines idled in a quieter language. Clamps unlatched in slow motion so steel wouldn't clear its throat. A kettle whistled once at dawn and once at noon if nobody was dead yet, chores as packed. Even the church bell that had slept through 2 winters tried one tentative chime. Habits survive because they know how. Every morning, the ridge reported birds first, then insects, then ground, the faint, long tremor of weight coming. One day, the tremor carried a higher pitch new gear ratios. Panthers. The handkerchief didn't flap when it moved. It nodded. The hush before a salvo is not silence. It is choice. People are never more themselves than in that half-second, the place between plan and act, between what you believe about the enemy and what your eyes have the gall to show you. Then the glove fell, and the day began saying who it intended to remember. Who? Calculation turned to weather at the 3rd salvo. Panthers that had rehearsed inevitability hit doubt like mud. Choir's gunrooms became metronomes, breech, open shell, and heel down cheek to steel, glove, up, glove, down. A kilometer right, T-34s burst from tree line like starlings with a thesis. The plan guns to stop tanks to keep stopping honest synchronized for once. War borrowed choreography. Katya's bruise stopped being injury and became hinge. The rounds came like loaves onto rails and into the breach. Apology got in the way of work and left the room. Maksim tracked a Panther betting on side armor and priced that bet correctly. Semyon felt the ground's moods, dust tremor intent. The commander's glove ran the battery like a conductor, with an orchestra made of recoil and breath. Erich tried to make the turret a chapel, and the sight a prayer. He lacked the grammar. The wedge bent at the first percussion, the difference between parade and war. To his right, 425 threw smoke on purpose. To his left, a tiger shouldered into marsh because maps lie in kind voices. In a notch between 2 birches, he caught the low weed-painted shapes he'd been promised wouldn't be there, patience arranged. Shrapnel arrived bees with iron for stingers. A 75-stitched gun 2's parapet. Air where Katya's head had been heated as it passed. She didn't duck. She loaded. The day makes you choose once and live with that person the rest of your life. The orchard presented its own minutes. Apples, weeks from sugar, gave the air a faint promise. A shell detonated there, and leaves fell like a confession. A Soviet recovery crew sprinted a cable across open ground, dragging a dead T-34 out of the path of the living. No doctrine for that? Just rope hands, Will? Compression made time tilt. The radio's both nets took the tone people use in delivery rooms, clipped stubborn, half astonished that breathing continues. Erich saw the Su-152s disguised as weeds and understood the genius, not where they were, but what they had refused to be impatient. Then the tide tried to be water again. Panthers pressed, tigers presented fists, half-tracks, poured men whose boots resisted mud. The gully began to receive attention. A long 75 rang their spade like a town bell. Semyon breathed 4 beats and slid the hull back 2 handbreadths. Maksim stole a glance at a swallow perched on a spent shell. The bird reconsidered and flew. The glove fell. The gun spoke. A panther forgot its geometry. Erich's arm began losing to fatigue. He jammed around forward and caught his own fingers before the gentleman breech turned into a door. The near mistake left pain in his elbow that would squat there for years. He glanced at the drawing lashes, sun stick figure, and promise paper he would remain a person inside the machine. Then he broke formation, a half-length, to change the angle, a sin that saved him, when the next 152 mm excavated the air he had been in a second before. The hinge came dressed as confusion. A German commander misread smoke and pivoted to face a threat 2 minutes old. In the seam opened by that error, 2 T-34s chose audacity over arithmetic and knifed through. One belched flame from a crack and kept going. They found a column of ammunition carriers and taught fuel humility. The bloom put punctuation on the ridge. Erich saw it and felt doctrine trying to resurrect inside his bones, hold interval, remain weapon. The human man whispered back, remain. He picked the nearer T-34, put a dart into its throat, then a second. The other tank chose not to die where expected. 425 shot arrived like a friend opening a door. Choir bled ammunition into meaning. The second gunhouse cleared a jam with the tenderness of a secret. A T-34 bounced a shot off armor skirt and learned a ricochet lesson nobody would hear from him later. The group learned anyway. Groups are like that. Then quiet only, a breath long, tested the field's nerve. The ridge had a new contour maps would never honor. The wedge would push again. But something measurable had changed. Hush proved heavier than noise. Patience had outlived first contact. The steel tide discovered it could be turned by 4 guns and a hand that knew when to fall. By noon, the air tasted like coins and rye. Everything smelled faintly of hot rope. Orders crackled on the German net hook. South knife from above let doctrine look like prophecy. Erich repeated the words and nudged 421 into the pivot. The whip antenna flicked clouds. He told himself the slope was an ally and kept the child part of his mind from saying, please. Dead Roll Choir's commander signed engines cold gravity for a motor. Semyon let the hull slither along clay. Maksim's sight held the notch between birches. Katya braced one palm on the spent case bag, one on a round asked to do more than physics. The willow whispered. The glove hovered. A command Panther, extra aerial's heavy turret bustle, showed itself with authority's carelessness. Erich glimpsed its black crown against blue and felt the old instinct protect the voice. He worked his sticky traverse with the patience of a father combing a child's snarl. The glove fell. The first round took the crown mid-word. SU shells don't perforate so much as end conversations. The cupola leapt. The turret slumped like a man receiving private bad news. Aerials wrote nonsense in smoke. For 3 seconds, the German net became snow where command should be. Machines pricked their ears for orders and heard none. Katya's hands had already obeyed. Maksim dipped 2 mils. The second shell found the ammunition half-track, tucked neatly behind the crown. Canvas lifted, the bed bloomed, and fuel wrote a brief, terrible flower everyone could read. Men dove right without thinking, saved themselves by instinct. Choir didn't celebrate. Now that would be loud. The commander tapped the handset twice, stand on their breath, and the 4 guns took turns, 1 fired, while 3 stole silence. Without its crown, the wedge lost grammar. A tiger shouldered into another lane and stopped to argue physics. A platoon trained to cover left on a word discovered the word lived in a dead man's throat. They covered nothing, then tried to cover everything. A panther found their parapet by accident and punished it on purpose. A sliver marked Katya's ear with a thin line the day would remember. Semyon swore a fifth beat and grinned traditions survive by adding just enough to stay alive. Maksim's eye watered. He told it gently there would be time for salt later. The next round slid under a turret cheek and taught it manners. Erich's traverse freed as his arm failed. He fired where a gun had been a second before. The miss gave him a clear view of what he'd been trained to mistake, not mass, not swarm people arranged. The guns placed, not chomped. The T-34s threaded, not hurled. Medics made bandages square. Recoveries sang through cable. On the net, someone said withdraw without signing it. Erich set smoke for his left-hand neighbor decency inside a machine and reversed carefully, giving panic no speed to borrow. He drove like a man escorting the last good sentence out of a burning book. Katya felt the last but two leave the rack. The commander's glove fell with the care of laying a child down. Maksim let the sight float a finger above habit and caught a panther flashing a soft spot it had vowed to guard. The round went. Something structural in the tide broke not loudly, just permanently. Silence did not arrive. It convalesced. The ridge muttered. The orchard shook itself like a wet dog. A limping T-34 clanked past track, sloughing off and rebiting every 5 meters, its commander flashing two fingers that could mean anything and everything. The German net shrank from choir to quartet, to duet, to a single voice husbanding breath. Reporters later would crop the day to one photograph and one brave caption. Professors would call it culmination and hinge. In the moment, it felt human, uneven back-talking ending all at once and not at all. The field forgot how to pretend it was ocean. Choir didn't cheer. The commander set his glove in his lap and studied the crease across the palm as if it were a map back to a former self. Maksim slid the sight cover down as tenderly as you put a book away. Semyon let his forehead rest on the wheel and taught his pulse a calmer tempo. Katya looked at her hands, oil brass dust, a hairline of blood, and didn't wash. Sometimes you carry proof a while. Evenings smelled of wet iron and bruised apples. The sun left fast like a guilty man. Choir's guns sat low animals pretending to be hills again. Ammunition counted itself to 0 and found 2 extra shells as if the day satisfied had tucked change in their pocket. They did the small work first. Semyon tightened the bolt that had sung off pitch all afternoon. Maksim wiped the sight with his shirt hem and watched his cheek's green rectangle fade back into skin. Katya opened her notebook and wrote 4 words without decoration: hush, hold, hit, hush. The commander laid his family photo on the engine deck to dry the daughter under her dragon vine and counted his crew, then the battery, then the gaps. Behind the ridge, crews walked cables with the solemnity of procession. A panther was hauled to a ditch lip and chose to rest. Nobody argued. A medic folded a bandage perfectly square. It looked like a blessing. Somewhere a bell tried one note. It sounded like a place promising to remain a place. Erich parked 421 behind a barn that still believed in hay. He killed the engine with reluctance and peeled off headphones to let birds back into the world. On the drawing's back, he wrote a sentence his instructors would dislike. They waited better than we did. He did not write defeat. He wrote what he could afford: machines. Our people spread thin. Patience kills faster than many calibers. Admiration is treason only until you meet the person who earned it. Night taught the map humility. The wedge pushed again, then planners ran out of adverbs. Histories would keep the proper nouns: panthers, tigers, Su-152's Prokhorovka, and the strategic verbs attrition, culmination. Men kept other words: wait, listen, breathe. The steel tide withdrew, not because it got tired of being tied, but because it met a shore that refused theatrics and kept its nerve. Years applied themselves in thin coats. A museum by the ridge displayed a willow switch, a glove with a palm crease scar, a sight glass with a faint green ghost, a battered stake that once marked choir's position and now marked picnic blankets. A docent learned to tell the story without shouting. Children drew tanks with eyelashes and asked why machines need eyes. Their parents said, because people do. Katya returned to watches. She held apprentices' wrists a second before they placed a spring, letting them feel what hush is in the body. When her daughter asked why the hallway clock sounded like it was counting something heavier than seconds, she said it is and poured tea, and Steam drew a thin white flag above the cup. Maksim married the signaller, who kept wires alive when shrapnel made opinions of the air. On summer nights, they set a radio on the sill and listened to stations, apologized for their static like old friends. He kept the sight glass in a drawer with his demobilization paper, and his ring box sometimes touching the rectangle to his cheek to laugh at how bone remembers. Semyon taught his boy to drive a truck, hands soft on the wheel. Let the ground tell you what it wants, he said, and if it won't be kinder than it deserves. In winter, he warmed the cab and held the boy's fingers to the vents. Hush, he said, and sometimes the word made heat. Erich took the eyelash drawing home. He repaired things other men had broken. In a jar labeled spare, he kept bolts that could have been labeled mercy. When someone at the beer hall said Kursk like a complaint, he said patience like a counter-argument, and lost pleasantly. He wrote to a friend, the worst part isn't horror. It's revision. The day insists you rewrite the paragraph where you made yourself the hero. He never went back to the ridge. He didn't need to. It had arranged itself in his bones, what broke the steel tide. Say it plain. 4 guns that knew when not to speak, a handkerchief nodding, a glove falling, 1 crown that mistook itself for weather and learned it was just a tank, a field that chose to be land again, a handful of people who refused to let momentum pass for destiny. The map tilted there. The war felt the tilt. Men carried it home.